with Slingo, and now going to be going over to Gamehouse, we just announced this morning that Gamehouse has acquired Slingo. So that's really exciting news for these guys. So congratulations about that. He's the GM at Slingo, and they've licensed their game to pretty much almost every platform that's out there. We're all familiar with Slingo and how popular that game is. Generating over $1 billion in consumer spend, which is pretty impressive. He's also apparently a Clio Award-nominated actor, so hopefully you'll be judging his performance today. We also have Kevin Flood, who's the CEO of Game in Line. Many of you probably have consulted with Kevin. He's probably one of the top consultants in the field in terms of understanding the social casino space and also understanding the iGaming space and the marriage of those two. He's got an amazing blog called Game in Line and always seems to be on the forefront of information about what's happening out there in the industry. Highly recommend you guys follow it. It's a really great blog. And also we have Brian Leung here, who's the CEO of Blue Shell Games, and you probably know them from Lucky Slots. It's been on Facebook for about 2 years and is also on all mobile platforms. They've got about 1 million in combined DAU, so it's one of the most popular games out there. I believe it's the 3rd most popular slots game. Right? Okay. On your way to number 2. All right, and then I'm also gonna, I'm taking the other chair here, and I'm George Zaloom. I'm the CEO of GoPlay, and we do distribution for social casino games, and we enable land-based casinos to embed social games into their websites and other publishers beyond those. So here we go.
Thank you, George. So our panelists here are to talk about the gamble of social casino game distribution. And to get things started, what we're going to do is very quickly just kind of recap what everybody's been talking about over the past day and a half. We're going to be defining social casino games as anything that's just for fun, where players are purchasing a virtual currency as a game of chance in order to win additional currency that isn't returned to the players, which we're going to separate from the definition of online gambling, which is going to be paralleling the definition by regulators, where it's an online game that contains the components of consideration, chance, and prize. So when we talk about a social casino game, we're talking about all the for fun stuff, and online gambling is going to be for any of the things where people are actually wagering and placing a bet. So we're going to leave it to the experts to talk about their opinions on things, and let's jump right into it. So with regards to platforms and discoverability, obviously we're talking about a very large marketplace. Social casino game marketplace is valued by almost $1.7 billion, which is going to grow to possibly $2.5 billion by 2015. So panelists, is there room on social platforms for more social casino games, or are we starting to get to a saturation point? Kevin?
Well, I think we're in, we had some discussions, I forget who it was this week, about leveling in games and metagames within casino games, and I think that's going to be the trend in order to differentiate yourself, whether it's in a network or not in a network. Sort of an analogy to that is where you have progressive jackpots in the real casino area. It's something like that, or another game that's off in order to engage people and differentiate yourself, and whether it's in a network or not a network.
Yeah, it's a very crowded space. We track pretty much all the games that are out there. There's over 300 social casino games on Facebook. When you add in the mobile space in there, it's almost 500, almost double that. So it's becoming very challenging for anybody who's a developer to get their game noticed with the rising cost of user acquisition. So what do you do to get your game out there beyond Facebook? Mobile is definitely the answer right now.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's room for growth if you believe that stat or some version of it, and I do. Like these guys pointed out, it's just going to be really tough given there are a lot of established games out there, and there is a bit of saturation in the market. But I mean, I think overall, over the next couple of years, you're going to see new games emerge. I don't think all that growth is going to come from existing games. But the kind of established companies are going to have a huge advantage where they have data, they have learnings from having games in the marketplace, and they're going to be able to cross-promote from those games, and they have a user base to do that from.
Okay, so building off of that, and knowing the fact that there are a number of leaders in the marketplace that have emerged, for people who are entering the space, what are the most effective methods for gaining visibility amongst the current leaders in the space?
I'm going to go off, answer this in probably a way it's a little strange, but I also am in the gamification area where I take games and build them for, not just the particular, general distribution. And I get involved with a lot of these brands that want these games on their particular sites or so forth and so on. And they start using distribution networks like Mochi Media and others. I'm sure you're familiar with those that publish your games there. And I think that is sort of an untapped market for getting visibility for your game. It's probably not the place that some of your competitors are going into. And you might be surprised at the amount of traffic you may get from that. So that's my suggestion.
Sure. I mean, I think, let's say from a player's perspective, you can tackle this a couple ways. One is content. Either branded or really quality content is going to stand out. And we've seen, like High Five Casino launch fairly recently, and they've been doing really well on Facebook. Another is gameplay. So we've seen kind of real money casino games. Some of the newer machines that are launching, you'll see some new mechanics, new bonus games, whatever, just kind of new gameplay. You can see in social bingo, kind of has some different gameplay mechanics than your traditional bingo games. So gameplay will continue to evolve, and that's where you'll see, the ability to draw some users there. And the last is maybe, let's say, opportunity, where maybe there's an underserved market, an underserved platform, or just a game that isn't really big yet, and you might have an opportunity there.
So, like I mentioned before, we work with game developers like Brian that are looking to expand their distribution footprint beyond Facebook. And right now, we've got heavy interest from the casino industry that is looking to make their websites stickier by embedding casino games into them. They're known as land-based destinations providing gaming, but none of their customers really think of them as online destinations. And so they're all starting to think about what their presence is going to be like in the next oncoming years and how to perhaps re-identify themselves or rebrand themselves as an online gaming destination. A lot of them are very concerned about Facebook. A lot of them feel that Facebook is potentially their enemy as it's become the biggest casino in the world. So a lot of these guys are looking at, how do I bring online gaming content back to my house website, so to speak, as a place to kind of re-identify my brand with gaming. So there's an opportunity to do that. There's a lot of companies doing, not a lot, there's a few companies doing that. We're doing it, WMS is doing it, IGT is doing it, Aristocrat is doing it. And beyond that, there's another opportunity, I think, also for developers. If you've got a really hot game, like you've got a really hot game, there's an opportunity to license that IP to real money suppliers that are running games in casinos to kind of license that up into real money and then eventually bring it back to online as a real money game, which is going to be the opportunity in the next year.
No, thank you. And I like Kevin's point on thinking outside of the box and some of the more alternative methods for looking at distribution and getting content in front of people. So kind of building on that theme, there's obviously some tried and true tactics that come from marketing, affiliate models, search engine, Facebook advertising, etc. So in your opinions, what do you think the most effective methods are for player acquisition and getting the content in front of people, improving that discoverability for social casino games?
Sure. So I'd say, first of all, definitely try everything there because users we'll react to different games differently. So maybe something that works well for Lucky Slots, doesn't really work well for your game, or vice versa. In Lucky Slots, what's been successful for us is Facebook advertising, in-game advertising, and maybe something that's not really on there, but basically cross promotion from our own network. So we have kind of a network of 30 million emails. We have something along the lines of 40 million installs on Facebook. And when we launched our iOS product, we were able to basically get to 150,000 DAU kind of before we really spent any money, because we were able to take that traffic from Facebook or from email and point it to our new product.
Well, there's no rocket science here. Okay? I mean, we just talked about it. It's basically bearskins and knives, pretty much, in the marketing space. And it's just a lot of hard work, and it's perseverance. I mean, you can, think that there's some magic in it, but there's no real magic in it. With the one exception, if you're fortunate enough to have the courage to put something out there that's unique, extremely unique, actually, and can garner some respect, then that's obviously the holy grail. But many of you, especially in the social casino area, you don't want to take those risks because you may go off the reservation, but that would be probably their nirvana.
So just, I'm sorry, quick follow-up for Kevin. So then do you feel it's almost more art than science?
Well, I think the marketing of it is bearskins and knives. There's nothing artistic about it, okay? And there's nothing clever about it, okay? I'm sorry, there's not. It's just a lot of hard work, and you can be successful doing it. But there is that other spectrum, which is the creative side, which is the startup thing we're talking about here before. You may have a game, blah, 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 you're making iterative changes on it or something like it. And in the casino area, you have a habit of not being very creative, right? So try something new. Give it a go. Get it out there, and chances are you may be successful, and more successful than anybody.
Any thoughts, George? Or?
None.
No.
None.
Okay. Well, actually, speaking to something that George had also mentioned earlier about talking how real money gambling is going to become more prevalent for the future, especially as things change in the U.S. A lot of social casino game developers have started to grow these fairly substantial audiences, and as Brian has mentioned, that you can kind of leverage that internal network. So what words of advice would you give developers of social casino games who are planning to utilize their internal networks, et cetera, to upsell consumers to online gambling as part of the cornerstone of their marketing tactic for the future?
Well, it's a big opportunity now. Like we were talking earlier today, 36 billion in land-based revenue, 698 million in social gaming revenue. So that's 1% of what the land-based operators are making. There's a huge opportunity now that's going to be presented to us here in the States that hasn't been before, and that's to take our games that we've been building for social and really take them into online gambling. That's probably the holy grail. That number next year is probably going to be over, I would estimate over $2 billion in spend next year, at least with New Jersey. So if you're thinking about getting into this, whether you're thinking about using a platform like Bettable, or I'm going to butcher the name, Obido, that presented yesterday, there's a real opportunity here in the States, and that's where the big money really is. But I think, just so everybody's understanding of this, regulation is a huge thing for real money gaming, and you're used to iterating on your games, making changes every day. Not the case on cabinet gaming in the facilities, where you have to get your games approved by the regulators and the gaming control boards and services that do this, and it takes months to do that. So it's going to be in a very different environment going forward with real money and how that's going to position out. Big challenges ahead.
This area, everyone has great speculation about it, and I'm sorry, most of your social games aren't going to become gambling games, and you aren't going to be successful in it. And I've done both, okay? couple of continents, and I've seen it. And I think you need to be really careful about the expectation. We can talk about all the mechanics of regulation and things like that. But even the game itself, in terms of the way you acquire customers, you hold them, you iterate with them, the look and feel of the game, all of those things are very, 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 very different. I'm saying that because I've seen so many of these social gamers try this and fail miserably in Europe. Awful, okay? And it's not to say that you can't do it, but be prepared for it and take a really fresh look at your game and understand that space. And the key to your success, if you're going to be successful at all, is looking at your current social casino customers and profiling them to understand which percentage of those people will actually migrate into a real live casino. And you have to be realistic about it. Is it 1%? Is it 2%? Is it 3%? What is it? And profiling these people is not that easy. It's a behavioral analysis part. It takes some real science to it. There's probability in it. There's AI stuff, case-based reasoning in it. This is not a trivial undertaking. So if you think you're going to throw those people at the casino and succeed, you're not. So take a deep breath. Yeah, it's an opportunity, but if you want to take advantage of it, you have to, invest some intelligence in it.
I'll say one last thing to that. You can also test. It's really easy to do, and you could say to a customer with a simple slide, a dummy slide, how would you like to play this game for real money gambling? Put it up there, see if they click on it, and then says, okay, thank you, we'll let you know as soon as it's available, and you'll get a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I'd agree with Kevin that I'd be careful if this is kind of your core strategy, because the conversion from your free to play to real money is going to be pretty low. If you're doing like 2 to 3%, that's probably really good. I'm kind of more interested in where I think the winners are going to be, where not only they're going to be able to take some of their free to play users and bring them to real money, but kind of combine the products from both sides, where you take some of the features and product knowledge from the social side and kind of the best practices from real money, and you'll kind of get hybrid products there. And I think those are going to be the winners.
So in staying with this concept for a second, is it a level of expertise? Because obviously a lot of the brick and mortar operators, a lot of the slot manufacturers are bringing people from the digital space for their expertise to understand kind of these new environments. Is there a reciprocal necessity for people who are developers of digital interactive fun content for that expertise from the gaming world to understand that marketplace as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look at real money, I think, let's say real money online, those folks are really good at UA. Obviously they get the whole kind of gaming backend and all that's required for the regulation, and then maybe the customer support and all the ops around real money. That's really important. From the social side, I think you get a little more innovation on the product. You get kind of game design, and then you get kind of different methods of distribution than just strictly buying.
I mean, you hear a lot of this stuff about Zynga, and they're in it and they're out of it, right? In this combo, and they're sort of the bellwether. Whether they're really relevant anymore is a whole other question, but people like to talk about them. And in terms of it's interesting. They have, Party, and basically Party is launching their stuff. Wow, why would they do that? They do that because they get it, because they don't have a poker site. They don't have a gambling poker site. It sounded like it, and they could never convert it to one, right? And we can talk about all this other stuff. And now they're withdrawing from, the U.S. market to get a license. Well, what they're really doing is that they're saying to themselves, who are we? We're a freemium social gaming company, and we better do well at that. Because if we don't do well at that, who cares about the gambling? And I think that's my advice for everyone here. Stay what you're doing, be really good at it, and if you're successful at it and you have some working capital to invest in something else, go ahead.
So in jumping back to something that George had said earlier, and something that's very near and dear to my heart, is with regards to brands and branded content and entertainment. So obviously, a lot of social casino games out there, they don't use brands. Some of them starting to heavily leverage our portfolio. So do specific brands or branded content in general have a meaningful impact on the success of products? And if so, how?
Well, I think Brian Kelly could answer this best with the success that these guys have had with their NASCAR games, on the floor, and the Michael Jackson game. Really successful, I think, brand integrations there. So I think that we could only probably bring that, online. Interesting. I came from the movie business. We have not had a lot of movies that became games that were huge successes. Very small on that. But big brands coming in can work. Another really success, like the Beverly Hillbillies game, is a hugely successful game in the land-based facilities, and things like that can come into the space, as we're seeing with all the high five games. Games that people were playing in the land-based operations, when you bring them online, it gives players the opportunity to play those games at home. They really, really, really like that. And we met Jethro Bodine at G2E last year, Max Bear, and he was standing around with his arms around these two blondes, and people were like, "Who is that guy?" And we're like, "Oh, that's Jethro Bodine." And we said, "Hey, Jethro, what are you doing here?" And he goes, "Oh, well, I've got my game. I've got the Beverly Hillbillies game. I own that game." And so we said, "How much do you make a day on this game?" And he said, "Enough to buy me a new Cadillac every day." So there you go, from the mouth of Jethro.
I pretty much agree with George. Brands are super important. They're going to really help get people in the door. But after that, the game is what's going to get them to, stick around.
I'm familiar with this in the gambling space with WagerWorks, which was bought by IGT, and we licensed, Monopoly and all that kind of stuff. And it does have a phenomenal impact, positive, and which has been represented in the real gambling and also on the casino floor. The problem with it now, it's freaking expensive in order to get, and even the availability of those brands. So if you're interested in doing that, you should, it may be too late, I don't know, depending on what your wallet is like. But I'd get going now on it. Think about brands that might be, interesting to your audience, and definitely do it. It works. Definitely works.
So for a moment, let's actually get mobile specific and really start thinking about the fact that obviously, as the world becomes more mobile and on demand, a number of companies are now shifting to a mobile first strategy versus necessarily Canvas, et cetera. So a number of people obviously feel that discoverability is the single largest challenge for marketing on mobile platforms. Panelists, do you agree? And if not, what do you think the greatest challenge is?
Yeah, I agree. And when we're talking about mobile, we're specifically comparing to the web, and more specifically to Facebook. And so on Facebook, viral channels exist. Facebook also has algorithms to surface recommended games based on what other players are playing, what you're playing. On mobile, none of this exists, really. There aren't really any viral channels. There's no way for a player to say, or for App Center to see what your games are, or what games you're playing, and really recommend things for you. So on mobile, if I'm a player and I just want to play new games, basically the ways that I can discover games are I can go to the App Store and browse. I can search in the App Store. I can go to some sort of review site. I can play another game and hope that an ad comes up for a game that I'll like, or I can ask my friends directly. And all of these methods require user effort. There's nothing that's just surfaced for users based on what they're playing or what they like. And so, yeah, I agree.
What's the most effective out of all those? Is it ads within in-game ads?
Yeah, definitely.
He's the man.
Yeah, I don't know if you can say much more about the mobile space, and unfortunately, if you're in Facebook and you've got a port your game over there, it's going to be challenging, right? It's not the same environment, and it is a crowded space, and we talked about content differentiation. You're going to have that. Not the same old slot machine game is going to work. But I do really want to go off the reservation now, and I want you to start thinking about the wearables, because the wearables are coming, okay? And they're coming in the next 18 months. They're coming from Google. They're coming from Apple. They're going to start replacing these phones, and there's going to be a lot of functionality in them. And again, this is sort of off the conversations here, but this is the next frontier. There's going to be obviously winners and losers in it, but I would definitely get in with the hardware manufacturers now that are engaged in this and figure out what, if anything, from a gaming perspective you can do on those.
But don't wear your Google Glass to a casino, so you get a stucco face.
Well, since you brought it up, let's actually talk to that for a second. Obviously, with the world becoming more mobile and on demand, where do you think people will be playing their social casino games, over the next 3 years? Obviously, are wearables going to be the type of thing that people will be utilizing to engage their content in that way? And will the typical social casino game player adopt that and move away from their iPad, et cetera, for wearables?
Well, I mean, just the thing. I mean, it knows my heart rate. It knows my caloric burn. It knows my movements. It knows my eye movements. It knows how I'm reacting to the environment. It's taking all that information from me because you have it on. So the experience is you're going to know an awful lot about what turns somebody on and what turns somebody off. So it's a completely different way of thinking about the end user. It's not how many clicks they do or their friends did whatever. It's how are you reacting to that experience, and how can you modify and change the experience based on that input.
But the average, casino player or consumer is a female, 35 up to 60. So they're still traditionally playing games on a desktop. Now they're also migrating to iPads and to their phones, but their eyes aren't what they used to be. So they like a bigger screen when they play. We see it. We talk to a lot of the users. They're still playing on their desktop. Not to say that they're not going to go here, but probably the bulk of that traffic is still going to come from larger devices, so they can see and actually manipulate the game better.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be, for the most part, playing on the same platforms that they are right now, web, mobile, tablet, with definitely a movement towards mobile and tablet. I think some of the things that Kevin mentioned are interesting, wearables, maybe smart TVs, maybe even, car consoles, but those are probably a little further out.
Interesting. So for right now, keeping it to mobile and tablet devices, have you found any really distinct differences between marketing social casino games between Apple or Android audiences? Have you found there's a lot of audience crossover or parallel, or is that something that's...
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think first off, monetization is different between the two platforms. So that's obviously going to, dictate how you're going to spend. Secondly, there is device fragmentation on Android, where on iOS you really have to worry about maybe the last 3 iPhones and the last 2 iOS versions. On Android, there's just a ton of devices, all different, screen resolutions. So that's going to affect not only your dev time and your QA time, but you may be able to monetize better on a specific device. So if you can target on your ad networks those specific devices, that's an advantage. Also on Android, there's the ability to buy incentivized users, so you can get cheaper users that probably don't monetize as well, but they may work really well for your app. And then last, I think geography is important, where Android has a lot of penetration in Asia specifically, so that definitely opens up some new game types, some new localization opportunities that aren't available on iOS.
Do Android users gamble, or in a different way than iOS users? Can you say like, oh, that's an iOS user pattern, or that's a... You can't tell the difference. The bigger bets, longer play. Okay.
That was a good comment about the localization and the difference in terms of Android's penetration versus Apple's. I do most of my business internationally, very little in the US anymore. And it's definitely a prolific platform. So you would think here in the US you'd probably go to Apple first, but I don't necessarily. If you have somewhat of an international audience, certainly Android is it. But there's one other thing that keeps coming up in a lot of these things too, is how developers get this content into a mobile environment. And there seems to be an increasing frustration with going through the stores themselves in order to go through that gauntlet of acceptability, especially in terms of social casino, with slowing it down and competing in that store. And there's a trend of people just now putting these things accessible on websites and downloading them. And there's a real trend in that direction away from the stores.
And actually, speaking to localization and understanding international marketplaces, there's also substantial differences in the types of games that people actually like to play territorially as well. Can you speak to anything that, in a truncated form, is there a...
I just went through a painful experience in Malaysia with a land-based lottery company and developing a social lottery game, which is awesome, by the way. Talk about multi-levels. But it was really interesting because we have, characters walking across the landscape. They had to be Asian-looking characters. In terms of what is lucky to them and not, it's all very different in terms of what we consider to be lucky. And though colors themselves, because most of the games I produce are basically textless, okay, because they have to be through the experience. So it's very unlikely for a game that you're going to create here, it's going to work in China or, in my case, in Malaysia. So there's vast differences, especially between Asian and other societies.
Yeah. Especially even the penetration of slots versus table games is
that's another thing.
Completely
Yeah, I mean, it's
different.
kind of interesting. One of the first experiences I had in this space was launching real casino games or whatever in Europe way back in the day for basically MGM, which is WagerWorks, now IGT. And these guys, and I was just the VP of engineering, I'm a guy make it happen, but they created all this American content and slot machine games and all this stuff, and nobody cares about slot machine games in Europe. They don't even know they're the little stupid little things. There's nothing like it. So like launching Double Down in Germany is stupid, right? It's not going to make it. It's not the content that they want. So you definitely have to be careful about what is the gambling stuff. And in Asia particularly, go to Macau and look at the games they're playing in that casino. They're nothing like the games you see in Vegas. They're just not. And so the experience is very, very different. So chances are if you're focused on the US market with your content in the social casino game, it's not going to play very well in other places in the world.
So in speaking to something that Brian mentioned earlier, a lot of people using their internal networks for traffic growth. A number of social casino games are relying on co-opetition, traffic sharing ventures in order to gain traffic and market share, tapping into those external networks as well. Is there a risk of this being a potential short-term gain, but a long-term loss of audience to other players, or have we found that players tend to be more reciprocal in the network themselves?
I mean, yeah, there's some risk, but kind of our philosophy is to make money while you can on those users. I'd say if you're thinking about something like this, you should really look at where your app is in its kind of life cycle. You probably don't want to do some of these kind of traffic deals, at launch when you're kind of figuring out, your users. You probably have a lot of improvements that you can make on your own retention, on your own monetization. But if your app's pretty mature and these other traffic sources are additive, then I'm kind of all for it.
All right, so moving into some of our final thoughts here. Let's start off with in your opinion, the top 3 pitfalls for the treacherous yet avoidable things for companies that are looking to explore social casino games. Now, you kind of locked in some answers ahead of time, but feel free to elaborate or change as we go along here. So starting with George, you said hiring a consultant, sending out a lot of RPPs, commissioning research studies, waiting for every single person in the friggin' operation to weigh in, and he or she who hesitates should start looking for a new job.
Well, we deal with a lot of casino operators who are really old school people. They are just learning to understand what the internet is, and a lot of them aren't on Facebook. They talk about Facebook as that Facebook thing, and that thing is going to take their identity. You've got to try things out. That's the one thing that we learned from the startup business. It's deploy and get out the product and test it. So we always recommend to casino operators, it's like, put the games on your system now and learn from how they work. And that's the best thing you can do.
Great. So for Kevin, the prospect of being regulated the same way online gambling games are regulated today. Now, you also mentioned prior to the event that this is probably something that we could spend almost an entire day discussing and deliberating. But in your opinion, how is that the most treacherous pitfall?
Well, unfortunately, you guys are going to be regulated in the social gaming area. It's going to happen. It's happening. I'm actually going to a conference in Australia on responsible gaming, and I've actually been engaged in a dialogue between the UK regulators and the Australian regulators. So it's only a matter of time that you in the social gaming area will be regulated similar to what the gambling people are. And what the heck does that mean, okay? You're not going to be regulated to the deepest extent that the gambling guys are, but there are some obvious things that will occur. One is that you'll be forced to put responsible gaming links and information on your social game content. So people can be aware that gambling can be addictive and it can be dangerous, and they have to have a place to go to do that, and you'll see those things on the gambling sites. The other more frightening thing is that there'll be an age restriction to the people that can play your social games. And you have to take a deep breath there, because this is coming, and it's coming, unfortunately, because real gambling is coming here, and they're the guys that are going to make you do that, because they don't want the unfair advantage. So it's happening. So you should start profiling your players as to who's above 18 and who's below. And the worst possible scenario, and this is not going to happen here, it's going to happen in Europe, is there's going to be a location restriction. So you're going to have to check. Well, first of all, checking age is not that difficult as long as you do it correctly. There's plenty of databases out there that have it. The problem you get into with it, and the MGM found this in Europe, is that the name isn't the first name isn't exactly as the person put in, but the last name is and the age is. So you get into sort of a heuristic type of challenge. Do you just binary dump them or take them, or do you have some fuzziness in that calculation? They all failed in Europe, not because they didn't have good marketing, but because they were bouncing people out of their particular games that the other guys were not, because they were so paranoid about taking it. So you may want to start searching through those services that do that and figure it out now. Trust me, this is coming. So be prepared for it. Don't be shocked.
And for Brian, creating a successful social casino game is not as simple as dropping a casino game on Facebook or mobile.
So, I think we've touched on this a bit, where social games are actually really different from your real money casino games. But more in the context of this panel discussion, I think we've been talking about how important it is to get a distribution strategy and how important it is to understand how distribution changes from platform to platform. So, it's not enough to just create a really good social casino game. To create a successful social casino game, you also have to understand distribution and have, your distribution strategy mapped out.
And one more thing that we would like to do today before we get to some questions for our panel of experts here is basically something I like to do called in one word, or possibly two. What do you think is the key to success in social games? And with a lot of fervor, George said, deploy. So.
Deploy. You said one word.
Yes. Well, I did get it in caps and with an exclamation point. So definitely a heartfelt deploy. For Kevin, marketing.
I think marketing. I mean, it's also you have such a great opportunity to continue to innovate where in other sectors you can't. So we had that conversation before about the startups, but it's not strictly in that area. I mean, you can have so much fun with this. I mean, continue to have fun with it, and you'll be successful.
And for Brian, execution.
So creating a social game is a process. It's a process that involves, kind of a lot of different parts, from product design to user acquisition, to customer support, all these different parts into creating a successful social game. And because the social and mobile landscape is constantly evolving, it's an iterative process that you have to repeat over and over again, after launch, and through kind of live ops. So it's really execution on all these different fronts, and that's what makes a successful game.
And I think there was also another recurring theme, and one I'd actually like to add to the list as well myself would probably also be differentiation. And the uniqueness of product is ultimately going to help in the success of a social casino game. So here's an excellent opportunity to ask some questions. We've got some experts here, and we'll start here in the front.
Hi, yeah. I'd just like to know what the panel thinks about second-tier game platforms like Kindle and Microsoft.
I can talk from kind of our perspective.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to repeat the question for the audio. He asked, what do you think of second-tier platforms such as Kindle?
So Blue Shell is a 30-person company, so it's a really small company. We don't have a ton of teams. So for us, it's more of a question of focus, and we're going to focus on the platforms and the games that we know can return revenue and users in scale. So we're kind of watching the other platforms, but we're not going to really do anything on them until they're a little more proven.
Interesting. I mean, that's a risk-reward thing, isn't it? Right. So, Amazon is underserved with content, game content, right? They have a fairly good distribution in it. I don't know if within that device there's the level or degree of marketing or so forth, if there's such a thing. But so that's there. Microsoft is such a weird thing, right? They're always trying something, and I'm not trying to bash Microsoft, but they haven't been very successful in some of these areas, okay? And yet they will probably sell some of them. So I guess my thinking would be that if you're struggling in in Google, and you're struggling a little bit in terms of Apple and getting differentiation or whatever, but your content is relatively easily transferred to those other environments, I might take the risk. If I were running the company and I'm sitting here going, boy, these guys are kicking my you-know-what in these other areas, and I can't outmarket them, and yet it's pretty good content, I would probably do one of those platforms. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I'm with First Magazine. What advice would you give to the North American government-operated lotteries to offer free or paid social lottery games on their website?
Oh, this is so me. I just told you I did a social lottery game, and it's Magnum.
Okay,
Magnum.
So I thought you might have
Right.
that.
So, and we've been
And
working
what
with them.
happened with it?
Well, it's kind of interesting. They provided I hate doing games actually where I have to, but it actually came out to be a good game, okay? It took a long time, we spent more money than we want to, blah, 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 whatever. But the thing that happened to them is kind of weird because when the game was finished and the executives of the company saw the game, they freaked out because the Malaysian government will never let them launch that game because it is so close. It is so freaking awesome. They absolutely freaked out. So what that told me is that that's going to be a very successful channel for these very, very conservative folks. Now, we redid the game for them and dumbed it down for them and whatever, but I think that game's, the thing we did is stupid, but the game we have now is really awesome. So I think those lotteries are the sort of the Luddites in this space, and they have the most to gain, with the exception that scratch cards online are not the answer. And this is the answer. It's an engaging, multi-dimensional thing that keeps them in that game for a long time, and I'll show you my game. You should definitely come to me. I'll give you the card. You'll really like it.
Did you want to add anything? No, I thought you were going to just say deploy.
Say it again.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, they both.
Just to
that's good, yeah.
paraphrase the question, I'm sorry. With regards to regulation, do you think that Apple will effectively be a proponent of facilitating the regulation process?
Yeah, they will. I mean, even in terms when the real gambling guys started going to Apple, there was tremendous pushback by Apple and head scratching and so forth and so on. Should we let them in and on what conditions? So that's an interesting comment. They'll be sort of pseudo-regulators, won't they? Both of them, they'll be insisting on this type of thing, whether it's age or location. Absolutely, they'll have to preserve their stores, yeah.
Fantastic. I think we have time for one more question, if anybody's interested. Yes?
Should we expect any innovations in terms of graphics for social casino games?
Should we expect any innovations with regards to graphics for social casino games?
Can you be more specific? You're talking about 3D, or what are you talking about?
Yeah, like back in 2010, we've made a 3D social game in Unity. It runs on Russian social network.
Mm.
It's like a Fire, if you're familiar with this client poker game, looks alike, tons of monetization, but there's only one another Chinese tablet 3D poker, which you can't even pronounce, now localized to the Western market, and nothing else. All the innovation in terms of like social mechanics, gameplay, but there's so much to do if you just bring it to 3D and no one is even trying to explore it.
Yeah, it's kind of has something to do with the accessibility, the download, the overall experience, the difficulty, and also the success they're having with 2D. It's kind of a mixed bag. Yeah, I don't really know. You know, we talked about Virgin Gaming yesterday here a little bit when they're coming from the video space, and it perhaps maybe tried in that area, but I actually don't know anybody that's doing it. No, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, if I could add a thought personally, I would say that if it's all about whether or not it actually is additive to the experience for the player. And if the innovation supports the player engaging more or increasing retention or monetization, then probably. But if people aren't finding that there's a correlation between the two, then more than likely people aren't jumping into that. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've reached the end of our time. Can we get a round of applause for our panelists today? Thank you very much for coming out.